we're going to close you in now for the strategy session. So it's been absolutely amazing this morning to see all of the talks. And also for me, especially to see the community, because this is you. So today we have 130 people registered, and obviously a very successful workshop. Lots of applications for money, lots of people working on their collections, mobilizing their data. So the initiative started, so we had a little bit of historic this morning. So we had a collections group that was formed in about 2017 with Swisscomnet actually formalized in 2018. We had a first workshop in 2018 in Bern, where people got together to discuss the issues and to try and build up what we wanted to do as a group. There was the collection survey sent out in 2019, and then the second survey sent out recently. And we had generally on the expert board the recognition of the importance of the community getting everyone together, having everyone on board, and moving with a common vision and a common goal. So within the expert board, we had a task force. So Peter, Christoph, Alice, and myself. And we set about creating the strategy. So the strategy for natural history collections in Switzerland is not Swisscomnet. It's kind of a larger picture because it's more inclusive of the different things that are going on. And then we sent out a questionnaire to the members of MuseNatCol. So the directors and heads of science in MuseNatCol received the strategy. And this was again back in 2020, I think early 2020. So we had the return of the questionnaire and we structured the strategy. And then we had the success of Swisscomnet. So we kind of put everything on hold for a little moment. We also had things developing within the initiative, especially the handbook. And when we went back to look at the strategy, we realized we really needed to update it. So what we're going to be doing this afternoon is getting input from yourselves on a national strategy for natural history collections. And we have the things that Alice will talk in a little bit after my presentation on the structure of the workshops and what we really want to do. So the Swisscol initiative itself also, in a sense, coincides with what we want to do in the strategy. So it's all about the community. It's all about having a vision, having targets, directions, going there together, having the forum to exchange ideas, problems, so that we don't all stay in our corners of our different cantons, having our problems individually. The point of having an initiative like Swisscomnet and then continuing it under a national strategy is really to facilitate the community, facilitate the contact, facilitate the coordination. And then also when we have a strategy, this also becomes a tool to guide us, and it also becomes a political leverage or a political tool that we can use to go forward. So we've already seen today there's the collections use, there's access, there's digitization, the coordination standards, resources, the management policies. That's something we can also work on and decide upon within the strategy. The data policies, the data standards, we've been working on that as part of this initiative. And then the creation of training and education opportunities. And then really the aim is creating the unique platform for scientific collection use. So we all know, we all love collections, we all are passionate about collections, but they're also something that everyone else uses and can use. So we really, the importance of mobilization and creating a common way to do this mobilization is very important. And this is what drives us towards the strategy. So in the first strategy, we had a vision. We have our vision still. Obviously, this will evolve over time. I think it's already evolved in a certain way with the success of Swisscomnet, because we've seen lots of the things that we first put in the strategy. We're kind of like, oh, if we've done that now, that's great. We're kind of further ahead than we really expected to be. So this vision will be refined as we go along. And what we want to do with the strategy as well is we really want to have contributions from institutions and individuals in institutions. And it's together that we will build the structure, the network, the community, and it's together that we need to identify our vision, and it's together that we need to establish our mission, our objectives, our targets, and again, use this then to obtain leverage for our community. I'm really very, very, very keen on community. Part of my job is international relations, and also I'm the current acting president of the Consortium of European Taxonomic Facilities, which is a united group of institutions, museum institutions from across Europe. And again, that's another community that's similar in this one. It's rather than a cantonal level, it's at the country level. And we've seen the power of working together, the power of coordination, cooperation, exchange, having these types of meetings when we can all talk about the different sorts of problems we have. And that is very, very, very important. So again, within the strategy, we have the aim. The original aim was to ensure the long-term maintenance and development of natural history collections. So it's not just about keeping them, it's also about developing them. Obviously, with the Nagoya Protocol, we have some constraints now about collecting. It's also evolving with evolving times and supporting the scientific use of collections. And we've mentioned a little bit earlier on DISCO, so the distributed infrastructure that's been forming in Europe. This is really an ambition that Switzerland has become a member of this, and we could contribute our data in a very sort of coordinated way with other European institutions. And then again, we have the roles of the collections. We need to look at what roles we have. Obviously, we look after them, but we look after them to preserve them, but also to use them, to study them. And obviously promoting the use of the collections, making them accessible both physically and digitally is one of our very, very important roles as collection holding institutions. And then there's the research links, the education links, and the societal needs that are linked to all of this. So when we first wrote the strategy, we came up with a list of things that should be in it. We asked the different institutions to contribute. So we had bottom-up feedback from your institutions. And these were the sort of 8 different areas that we wanted to focus on. These were the questions that we sent out, and we got responses that Alice and I worked on to generate the strategy document. So these have all been kind of addressed in the initial document. We got returns. So the returns were analysed and used to modernise the document. But like I said, we had a kind of a stop. Once SwissColNet was funded, we realised it was time. We had different focuses because we were kind of working with getting everything ready for the funding, discussing what's going to happen, launching the steering board. But we also had COVID halfway through. You remember that? So we saw everything kind of stopped. And then when we looked at the strategy again, we're like, okay, this now we're actually active is a really, really good time. So all of the key points that were identified by the institutions at the beginning of this process were all incorporated into the strategy. And then we had progress, which is really very, very positive. So we saw today how successful the initiatives have been. And we can cross some of the things out, or at least downsize them with respect to what we had in the original strategy. Because we've seen today that the management practices, all the data standardization, that's all going on. It's a question of us updating, connecting to the different standards, using them, implementing them. So then we have the physical and virtual access, and we have the Swiss Virtual Natural History Collection, which will come into use. And then we have the collaboration, support, networking between institutions, which has happened. And then we have international connectivity, which has also happened. So we are also, in a sense, in an evolving period. And this is why we wanted to have the workshop today, to capture your input into the workshop. So the final part of the strategy is really what's next. So we need to be clear on the reasons for us continuing this type of activity as a community. Because I think we all have a lot of pleasure with our collections, but it's also we have a lot of pleasure meeting each other and just exchanging, talking about them, finding collaborations, finding people that you can ask when you have a problem. This is one of the key things that happens with this type of networking activity. So we need to be clear as a community why we want to go on. And this is one of your tasks. I'm kind of giving you little hints about what you're going to be doing next. So why do we want to be together? Why do we want to stay together? And where do we want to go together? We need to define where we want to go, why we want to go there, how we want to go there, and by what means. Means can be in kind, physical, also financial. Financial is always a little bit of a delicate subject, but it's a key subject here. We need to identify and be very clear about our value. What is unique about us? What is our unique value? How can we leverage on this unique value? This is very, very important. We need to be able to say why we're proud of being part of Swisscomnet and why Swisscomnet is important. And sometimes we're not very good at doing that as a community. We make lots of reasons why we should be there, but we avoid actually the real reason, and we need to be very clear about the benefits. And then we need to reflect on how the initiative should be sustained and by whom. Business plan, political support, funding, all of the kind of technical details, who's going to govern it, how's it going to function. These are the practical things that are kind of in the second phase, but we still need to think about this and how it's going to go on. So basically now we're going to have this workshop. You're going to contribute loads, right? Right? Yay! You're going to contribute as much as you can. We will go away and then analyze the data. We're hoping also to give a first feedback so we can do a quick report, everyone can get the information. And then we can also start building on that and doing this in a series of workshops over the next few years until the end of the Swisscomnet funding initiative, which is 2004. So we have lots of advances, lots of successes, and now we need to look onto the future and look to where we're going. And that's my part finished. So now I'm going to pass the microphone. Well, actually, she's got her own microphone, so she can turn her own microphone on. And this is the part where Alice will explain exactly what you're going to be doing this afternoon. So thank you, Alice. I will move out and turn me off.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you all for being here. We're so pleased to have so many people this afternoon still. So it looks like a very long list of things to do, but don't be afraid. We're going to be fine. And we have simplified the whole process in having 3 main themes. I will detail them a little bit. The first one is really about networking. This is really what we are doing today, but we want to empower it, to sustain it, to support it in the future. So what are the main solutions you can have? What are your needs? What are the options we can go? There is something also some of us are very keen about is promoting our collections as a research tool. And this is very important also for lobbying among other sources of finance to be able to see that all the data we are accumulating is just not only to make inventories, but also to provide information and to provide new ideas for future research. And then we want also to valorize the collections as training, educational, and cultural resources. And that's something also in terms of societal, we have to be very well promotive about the importance of our collections as tools that can be used by our community, but also by the general public. So the idea is within these teams, in order to help the discussions, to start the process, we listed some questions that can be helping us to start the discussions. So for instance, regarding empowering the network, what can be developed on top of Swisscomnet? How should activity be governed? Do you have idea of how the network can be funded in the future? And how about political role can this network play in the Swiss landscape, but maybe also in the international landscape? Regarding the second theme is maybe something we're more familiar with regarding on where you're working, but how can you use the collections regarding research? What can be done to encourage further research on our collections? How can we ensure that the expertise is maintained in the future, taxonomic expertise, but also expertise regarding collection management? How can we ensure that collections are developed, are enriched, meaning having new collections, a new way to increase the amount of data that we have from objects? And also, how can we both sustain and manage the infrastructure, which is related to data aggregation? And regarding the last theme, valorization of collections as training, educational, or cultural resources, how can we better show the importance of collection as a network? How can we promote the training regarding our collections, linking both taxonomic and management collection? How can we use and promote our collection regarding education in general, and of course, as a cultural aspect? So these really are just ideas to help start the discussion. And what is important to know is we have to divide all of you in groups because we are too many people to discuss all together. But the idea is that each group has the same questions. And it's really open to discussion within the group if you want to talk about one subject in preference, but really the idea is everyone will have the opportunity to give ideas about all the three themes, and at the end of the day we will come back together. The group leader will express the main result from the discussion, and will try to wrap up all of this and to have some kind of conclusions, or at least to summarize the main elements. Okay, I think we'll start again. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for all the discussions. I heard it was very interesting and very successful, but we'll see with the result here. So the idea for the next 40-45 minutes is to have each group leader or selection of people from the group to present the main results of the discussions. Just, of course, you don't have to go into details, but to have the main impression and maybe the points you'd like to put forward. And in order to be very easy, we'll start with a group number. And I led the group 1, so I will try to sum up what we did in that group. Because we were in the big room, I guess, we didn't focus on one specific topic, but we sweep all the topics in one big discussion in a way, so maybe that's why it looks like something very dynamic, let's say. The first part of what we discussed was linked to empower collections and mostly to make sure that the result of our projects of Swisscolnet can be used both to lobby and also to expand the knowledge of the general public. So how can we use our result through websites, to communication material, really in order to open the collections, to make all what we can do about collections known to politics, publics, and universities. Within the networks, I think people were really happy with the idea of workshops and saying that we should do at least 1 or 2 per year in the future, maybe with some satellite meetings, also related to groups, topics, maybe on several locations. And this idea of workshop was also taken a bit later when we talk about the relationship with universities. We thought that linking some satellite or sessions on research-based collection-based research could be interestingly done in the biology meeting. So that's something, a connection also with students and making the collection known to other researchers. So regarding the network, the workshops, maybe with inviting international key speakers in the futures. Some people were keen also on making an exhibition on Swisscolnet result and having this exhibition traveling around Switzerland. Why not? There was some discussion about how to use our material, pictures, video on social media, web, but all of this needs some energy and people. A very easy idea, and I think it's really doable, is to have a photo contest among Swisscolnet projects. Maybe at the end of the Swisscolnet, we can have a competition about the best pictures that can be with a jury selection, and then these pictures can be used for make some publicity of the project. Well, the idea was really to collect as much material made by all participants and to gather them to help make some publicity and to continue the lobby onto politics and the public. Relating to education, every discussion came back to universities, whether we should increase the link, we should have students coming to our collections, especially in museums that are based in cities where there is no university. How can we attract researchers and students to come to these collections, which which could be very useful also to their research. So we had some idea of how to increase these networks between universities and collections. In some cities, this link already exists, but in others, it was more difficult. So maybe Swisscolnet could act in the future as a board for proposing projects from collections to the university and make some publicity about possible projects on collections, research, and so on. The idea of infiltrating the curriculum at school and for teachers were really interesting to many people to have more knowledge on collection. The difficulty is like many schools are today giving up their collections. They don't want to keep them. So how can we provide them new collections that make them still want to present them to students, not only dusty old birds, but maybe new specimens that can be really attractive to students. And the cultural part was maybe something we didn't discuss so much, but the subject of decolonization was also discussed. Regarding science linked to university or not, there was some discussion about availability, congress, citation, but this is really linked also with universities. And finally, we had also some discussion regarding the future and the user of the Swiss virtual natural history collections, which should not be only a window for the community to look for specimens, but also acting really as a window on collection for public and politics. I think I took almost 5 minutes to explain a lot of things, but people from group 1 is something that I missed, an important thing that I forgot to say. Okay, so it was really broad, as you can see. It covered more or less the 3 main themes. And from that, I will give the mic to group 2. See if you have new elements or some more specific discussion on some theme.
Thank you. Yes, so group 2 was discussing collections as research tools. What is the role of curators? What is the role of collections vis-à-vis a broader public? We had to deal with 4 questions. We will present, or we have first started with a rather general discussion and then have continued working in 4 small groups, and the outcome of these 4 questions will be presented by the groups independently. So I will run with the microphone looking where my partners are, but I will start with the first question: what can be done to encourage research on collections in Switzerland? Curators told it is awfully difficult. If you find old dirty boxes somewhere in an old building and you have to try to get them in a modern state, this is not easily possible. So how can we do that in future and do that better? We do suggest that collection strategies will be included in research plans. Already when you plan to do research to be submitted for a grant proposal to Swiss National Science Foundation, you have to specify your sampling strategy. What do you collect? Which is the future of these collections? Where do you deposit them? The Swiss National Science Foundation shall then support specimen archiving, like they do with open access, like they do with supporting data archives. They have to support archiving the specimens. And I mean, as an important step towards open science, the specimens are in the very core of making research transparent. What is the added value of having these archives, these specimens, publicly available and not after a PhD or after a master study, simply thrown away at the earliest possible time? They are archives of diversity, and we don't have to go more into detail in this room. And how can we encourage research on collections, also vis-à-vis the museums and specifically smaller museums? It's to strengthen the role of curators in the whole domain of research. They have to become co-applicants in research proposals because they are the gatekeepers to the specimens when, for instance, dealing with phylogenetic analysis, where museomics is part of the proposal, or where specimens are considered for taxonomic revisions. So strengthen the role for curators. That's, for me, a very important step in how to encourage research on collections in Switzerland. Then let's move on to the second question. How can we ensure that expertise is maintained? I think this is Britta.
Thank you, Christoph. We did approach this rather broad perspective. We started on the very famous phrase of "you only protect what you know." Expertise is not guaranteed in the future, so we think we should really emphasize on giving knowledge transfer from primary school to the universities. That's one of the possibilities to guarantee that we will have enough experts in the future. We have to motivate people to become an expert, for example, for edible plants, whatever. We think that to maintain expertise on the long run, every child in this country should have a list of species, or there should be a list of species that every child in this country knows, be it from experience, be it in school. And it should also be proud of it, that it knows these species. So that means we really have to encourage teaching on all the curriculum levels. I think, Alice, you already mentioned encourage it in universities. I think we could start even earlier by doing a combination of fieldwork with schools, universities, youth groups of maybe NGOs dedicated to nature protection, so that people become motivated to really go out in the field and to know the species. We also lack, and that was mentioned to me during the break, we need role models of people who are great in communicating how to become an expert on species. We also need a red list of experts because they're really dying out. And of course, collections are a great means to increase the knowledge. You already mentioned that as well. And we also think we should encourage the existing, experienced experts to train the young ones, to train the next generation. This should also be one of the topics that experts in the museums should do and should be proud of, that they can hand on the knowledge and they're the keeper of the flame, so-called, and they should give that to the next generation.
Thank you, Britta. And the next point on how can we ensure that collections are enriched by Martin.
So we discussed how can collections be enriched. So one very important thing is that natural history museums should improve their way how they stress the importance of collections, because not only to the general public but also to the government and politicians and money givers, that I think most of the museums are struggling with limited space, with poor conditions about the collection, like climate and humidity, and they're also struggling with understaffment. So we think that now is also a very good time to do that, because with the discussion about climate change, the discussion about loss of biodiversity, the public awareness of the importance of the natural history collections could be now tackled, and the museums have, we think, done a quite poor job in the past to really stress the importance of the collection, that the museum is not only a nice exhibition, but also that the collection is very important. So that is one point. Another point is that we should improve the information to the general public, to lay persons, how to properly collect, because we think that there are quite a few people who enjoy collecting, for instance, insects in their free time, and we are often offered huge collections by them, but they are scientifically worthless because there are no data about the date and the place where they're collected. So museums should maybe improve the way or inform the people how to properly collect, so that we get more scientifically relevant collections by laypersons. And another point was that if research is done with museum collections, then the articles that are generated, the data that is generated, there's often very poor feedback to the museums itself. So we get research articles, the data is transmitted to GBIF or other places, but the museum itself often really gets a very poor feedback, and the benefit for the museums themselves is quite poor. So that should also be improved. Yeah, I think this is the most important things.
Thank you so much. And we come to the last question. How can we sustain, manage the infrastructure for data aggregation?
Thank you. Yes, we talked about this topic, and we appreciate the networking in between the museums, but we talked about infrastructure for data aggregation, and we asked first also what is meant with the infrastructure for the data aggregation. So, and then we decided, or we found out there are already two platforms for aggregating data. This is GBIF and GeoCase. And so this would be necessary to bring together with the researchers this platform, and it is necessary to have an interface between the researchers and these platforms. And so we said a main role has SCENAT, or the Swiss Academy, has to play to guarantee this interface.
Great, thank you. So we are at the end, and we come to theme 3, please.
Yeah, thank you. We addressed the 3 themes, but we didn't intend to provide a right answer to all the questions. So these are mostly general thoughts, and members of my group, if you have something else to do, please go ahead. Regarding these 3 themes, what was perfectly clear is that they are closely interconnected. And sometimes we jump from one theme to another, meaning that these 3 themes are truly the themes that might be related to a starting point of a national strategy. And this is important. This is important because we saw, and this is a major output of that group, we saw the importance to work together, to work much more as a community in a collaboration. And this is important because we saw the importance to have this collaboration on a long term, not only 3 or every 4 years with funding, but we needed really to secure funding through this exchange of information and know-how. And what was extremely important here, for example, was to have an active web-based exchange of information. The handbook is a brilliant product based on this community, and why not to keep alive and update it every day, the handbook, through a web-based exchange platform that would allow us not only to exchange scientific data, but management data. It was also very clear for us that this reinforcement of our partnership should go through a partnership that is already encouraged by the SwissComNet initiative, in the sense that we thought that this idea to have 2 institutions working more or less on a common objective is a brilliant idea that should definitely go ahead with a national strategy. And we saw, and this was also an output of our discussions, the importance of every single specimen stored in our collections, independently whether it belongs to a large institution or a small institution. We wanted also to, or we were concerned about structural funding. This is important. We might go into the direction to have permanent funding for our institutions. And at the very end of the discussion of this theme, we were exploring what might be the largest sources of funding, for example, to maintain our collections and to take advantage of every single object that is stored in our collections. And I then decided to, why not to discuss about the role of the National Science Foundation on that permanent funding of our collections. Because museomics is a reality. This kind of research on how to use natural history collections to answer environmental issues, those kind of research are getting funded. And they are all based in our collections. So why not to push a little bit so natural history collections are better recognized on this kind of research that is getting basic data from our holdings. As I was telling, it's closely interconnected, one theme to another. And then we jump to, let's imagine that, for example, we have a solid community that exchanges information, that work together. And once this community has also a voice with respect to the politicians, the next step is how to improve the scientific use and the awareness of the scientific value of our natural history collections. And of course, then we thought that probably it would be a role of each one here sitting in this room to probably bring additional awareness among our students that modern science can be based on objects stored in our collections. It means also that we, and that was almost clear, that we need to start very early. We need to start very early the importance of natural history collections. So we probably at the level of primary school, this should be done. So natural history collections are omnipresent from the very early steps of the education. We wanted also to enrich our collections in a legal framework. That was the point about how to enrich our collections. And immediately, and this was very important, we almost were entering in this very spiny topic of the colonial legacy of natural history collections. So we do agree in that these collections should be enriched. We need to get new objects entering to our drawers, but they, of course, they should be collected on a perfectly legal framework. And of course, the big question, yes, we want to maintain the natural history collection, we want to develop them. And if we want to enrich this collection and enter new objects, additional funding will be necessary, not only for space, but also for human resources. For the third theme that is related to education, that is related to training, I would like to stress the point about public outreach. We all know that training is important of new taxonomies, of technical staff. And I thought that this was a brilliant idea that came out about training to everyone working in the collections, and especially if you are involved or you are supposed to be involved in public outreach. The question was, are we trained to do public outreach or not? And what's the role of all of us as curators in public outreach? It came out that it is true, it's becoming more and more important. And then I asked the tricky question, how far would you invest yourself in public outreach, receiving or giving public visits? And we were talking about 10 or 15% of the times, and almost every participant in my group was keen to participate in 10% of their time in public outreach. And this was interesting because that showed that we are becoming more and more sensible to this point, because we know that it's to us to teach to others and show to others the importance and the treasures of our collections. So why not to ask for courses on how to communicate to the wide public and to be better, and especially on this subject. So those were some of the points that we address. Others were collected by Pierre Dess, and we're going to communicate all this to you. Something else, members of my group? Did I forget something? That's it.
So I'd just like to thank first my group. I think we had a wonderful discussion. We could have gone on for quite some more time, but so I don't want to repeat a lot of things which already been mentioned. I'd just like to start with encouraging research, and we think a museum needs to do research, and it needs to get the funding. And I really like the definition that the curator, the profession curator, needs to protect it and support it. And I say that as a director of a museum. We also talked about the relationship between museum and universities. We all agree that we depend on each other. I think we are, as a museum, also a wonderful platform to communicate science to the public. And we all know that this can be a very nice or a very important source for different exhibitions. But we want to be partners, and we don't want to be a warehouse for the universities. It's also important. We are aware of the fact that certain museums in our communities are quite away or are not in distance to a university. And this can be a problem because the link directly, often on a bilateral way, between people from universities are important. And so we thought that we could strengthen ambassadors in our community for smaller museums, so ambassadors from larger museums covering also smaller museums. Given that we have now a network which is establishing itself, it is becoming more and more important. We think that our data on just a more technical basis, that our databases should be accessible for robots. We discussed that, or we heard about that before, so that really with search engines down to the level of a specimen, the data can be found. Then the expertise, how we do maintain expertise. I think teaching in universities, university courses is important. We should often, or as a biologist, I had the first experience with people from a museum in the framework of the university and not in the museum itself. It would be even better to teach within the building or within the Institute Museum, because I think then it would be much easier also to explain that the museum is not just an exhibition. We do agree that we need expertise on two levels, on the taxonomic level, but also on the management of collections, and we need to get there professional. And what is very important, what we find out that if we finish our work on science, we need to publish our science work. So this is something we also have to learn. This means also that we have to become more and more international. We agreed that research for us, museums, is not a national level, it's international, and we have to publish it on an international level. Enriching collections, we agreed that we would like to have a lot of samples also from the universities, which collect samples, but we don't want to get everything. I think we all have our collection strategies, or we still do develop them. And they should be ideally communicated so that we not get the bin for all the collections which just need to be deposited. But in general, we agree that we can gain a lot in teaching also the universities and teaching other high schools what is a collection, how do we store them, and how do we get them accessible for further research. The question here is, again, as we had it at the beginning, is do we have the resources? Do we also want, as museum researchers, do our own collections? And as we agreed, the resources should be available that we can collect. We should continue to collect, and that because we are also the experts in the field for certain things which are not as easy to collect. Then to the very end, we agreed that we need the infrastructure to maintain our contact, and that needs to be done on a national level, and that at least on a national level, and that it should be funded on the national level. We also discussed about the legal status of our collections, and we know that some of our collections here within this room, or you responsible maybe, are not protected legally, and we need to make also efforts on this topic. Yes, and then that the collection, that the ethical aspects, obviously we discussed as well. Now, did I forget something very important? I just look at some faces. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we had very good discussions in group 5. We didn't write it down, so just in case we feel bad, I've made some post-its for us. So we have some post-its. I wanted to just resume everything. Obviously, we're a very similar community. We've had similar discussions. So I just wanted to say, we just wanted to go over the benefits that we found about working together in the community. So we really thought the connections were beneficial, the collaborations, all of the benefits that we're sharing from talking to each other, from sharing data standards, expertise, experiences. The exchange that we have during the coffee breaks, in the meetings, we want to have more of those. We want to have more meetings, more workshops. We think the funding is really important. The funding has really helped a lot of small, medium, and large institutions bring visibility and importance to collections. And we think it's very important for the lobbying power. So really the resume is that we are more than the sum of our parts when we work together as the network, as the unity, as the community. So then I went over our notes, and we came up with 4 major topics which I've created kind of catchphrases for. And the first catchphrase we have is next generation thinking. We need to think about the collections in a different way. We know that they're a research tool, but we also need to perhaps engage in the cultural and historical elements of our collections as well and reach out to other communities. And the next generation thinking also goes to how we use the collections as scientific research tools. And maybe we need to be proactively reaching out to other communities that might want to use our collections but don't really know they're there, don't know how to use them. This could be functional traits. This could be all sorts of philological traits. This could be other communities that might need our data. So that's the next generation thinking, is we need to be proactive in not just staying in our own world and knowing how wonderful our collections is, but actually going out and doing this, moving this forward. Then what I've called is back to basics. And this covers really the digital world is fabulous, but it's not everything and not the only world that we have. And that we need to enrich these collections, and I've heard this come up in several of the other groups, and actually go back to our basics and go out and collect specimens, but also encourage other people to do it for us and with us, in collaboration with us. And this we kind of spoke about the general problems associated with people collecting, and this has been mentioned in other groups. So we thought in order to get ahead of this, we maybe need a toolkit. So one of the things that could come out of our work together is a toolkit. How do you collect something? How do you preserve it? How do you label it? And how should you present it to the museum? What do we need when we get a collection coming in? And then there's also the good practices guidelines. So how do you label something? Can we produce something, a database with all of the Darwin Core standards already in, so people enter their data into this standard? And what we said is there's potentially lots of collections that are done with research projects from students that don't actually ever end up in a collection, or they do end up in the collection, but they end up in the cupboard behind because they're not quite of a good enough standard or the labels are not there. So we need to be proactive in actually enriching our own collections using the research community around us. And then we said that we also need to be perhaps proactive in contacting different research groups, different research people, either at universities via the different societies, so that we actually proactively say, hey, if you get collections, this is what we need, this is how we actually can see the collections come in, so they don't end up sort of behind us in the cupboards. And then my next topic was All for One, One for All. And this is more dealing with all the partnering and the mentoring that can happen between big and small, medium and big. Everyone is in a community and we can all help each other out. So obviously the big institutions often have a little bit more financial resources, and they can actually help by partnering with smaller institutions and having the exchange, having the know-how passing between different institutions. And this was seen as being very important. And also the importance of having research partnerships, because some of the smaller institutions are not actually doing much research because they are at capacity, and that they would really like to be involved in research, and they can be done within this larger network. So really looking for research partnerships involving as many people as possible. And that was also spoken about by Nadir, who was saying sometimes if we know what's in smaller collections, they can actually be far more valuable on a local level than the larger collections. So knowing all of this was really important. And we spoke about how the discussions and the exchange and the unity that's created here is really, really important. And then my notes are stuck down, excuse me. Collections are cool was my next phase. And this is the outreach and the communications part of our discussions. We were very, very, in a sense, enthusiastic about talking about our collections and obviously needing to raise public awareness about collections, that they exist and that they should exist for longer than the next few years, and that they will exist long after we are no longer here, and we also want people to research on them. We thought about storytelling, and we realized the importance of storytelling when you're talking about collections. The human part of the collection, the story of how it got from A to B, who collected it, when they collected it, where they were, and all of the things related to when you see just one specimen. It's kind of, I mean, I love them, but if you just see one specimen, it's out of context. But if you can tell a story about who collected it, where they went, and how the specimens traveled around the world, people are interested in that human side. And then we also thought about what we could possibly do, and one of the ideas was to create a sort of a didactic reference collection so that this can be available as a tool that can be loaned, or that's something that's in situ where people can come in and actually get much more contact with collections, touch them, observe them, use them, find out about them. So then to have a link between the didactic reference collection and then also research, so linking collections to research, what's the point of having a collection? We do a lot of research with our collections. And then also having things like exhibitions, and it was an idea to have QCR codes on the collections, which then link back to a specimen and then the story behind the specimen. So you're kind of involving the digital generation. And these were just sort of brainstorming ideas that we had related to that session. So those were the kind of 4 themes that we came up with. So next generation thinking, back to basics, all for one, one for all, and collections are cool. And then we are much greater than the sum of our parts, so we're much stronger as a community. And then we also came up with ideas for more work such on topics, and actually the training for public outreach came up also in our group, having, we do guided visits, but maybe we've never had any training on how to handle them. Sometimes we thought that might not be important because the one thing that unites us all, and the one thing is extremely important for our community, is passion. Everybody I've ever spoken to in a natural history museum is passionate about their collections, their institution, their research, what they do, and the heart of the the community in natural history collections, I think, is that passion. So I think as soon as you transmit that passion to anybody else outside of your community, that's when we can really speak to the public. So I do think that we do need training, but we need to maintain that passion. So that's where we have a real leverage when we're actually talking to the community. So again, I didn't cover all of the things that we said, and some of the things that have always been said I haven't done here, but I just think those 4 major sort of take-home messages were where we went through in the group. So again, thank you to the group. Did you want to add anything? Another slogan? More contributions? No, thank you very much. We had really, really good discussions in that group, so it was very interesting. So what's going to happen next is that we're going to, so we went through all of these things at the beginning. You've seen this slide before. These are all of the things that we were aiming to do in the strategy. What's going to happen next is the group leaders and the note takers are going to make the resumes of the contributions. Alice and I will go back to our original strategy. We'll probably totally cross it all out and start again. And we'll come back to you with the draft of the strategy again I'm not going to promise when, because that's always a bit of an error, because we never do it when we expect. But we will come back to you with the feedback on the strategy, and we will develop it up to the end of Swisscol in 2024, so it should be ready. But I just wanted to ask you, do you think a national strategy for collections is important? Do you want one? Are you prepared to help us make one? Pardon, I didn't hear that. That wasn't so good. Hang on, I'm going to do it again. Are you prepared to help us make one? Yay, that's better. So again, we need to create the strategy with everybody on board. We need bottom-up feedback. We need the strategy to represent us. There's no point having a strategy which we don't identify with, because nobody will actually follow it, and it won't do anything except sit on somebody's piles of stuff to read. We need you to engage. So we will be engaging with you during this next phase of the process. So I heard all of you. You're all on my list or our list, and we know where to get hold of you. So that'll be fine. So the next steps are really for consolidation of the results. That's going to be a process where there's a feedback from the groups to us and from us to you, and then we will again move forward. The updating of the document will take place with these outcomes, also the project improvements, the progress that we've made in the project. There'll be the consultation period, and then the final draft, in theory, will be an outcome of the Swisscolnet initiative. And that's also, again, in the SERI. We have to, at the end of the project, give the SERI report, and the strategy will be part of that. So as part of the whole reflection on do we need a strategy, we need to have the discussions that the institutions, you need to have discussions also at your institutional level, inside your institution, with your directors, with your collections managers. You need to have discussions probably also at your, whoever is your administrative body, about Swisscol and about the strategy, because it's very important that people are informed. And some people are city administration, some are canton administration, so that's going to be very important. The generation of public and political support is also going to be very important for the strategy. If we do this in isolation, it's not going to serve any purpose whatsoever. So we need the political support. Political support is easier if you have public support. They're linked. So again, we need to go out and really get public support for the collections, for their utility, for the public interest that they hold. The terrible bits now are the financing and the sustainability plan. All good intentions are good intentions unless they're actually put into action, and actions usually cost money. So we do actually need to find a way to finance, the strategy accounts. Once we've got the strategy going, we need to find a way to finance the running of the strategy. A strategy doesn't mean anything if it's just a document. You have to have targets, you have to have progress, you have to look at your progress, and at the end of the period, you write a new strategy based on the failures or the successes of the previous one. So in order to do that, there needs to be sustainability and financing. And then you need to decide how to run it. We need to have a diplomatic, consensual way of running the strategy. It has to be made with a selection of people from different cantons, different organizations, who are prepared to step up and have some sort of role in overseeing the strategy. So I just want to thank you for your participation and anticipate your contributions to the strategy, and thank you in advance for working on this. I do think the strategy for natural history collections in Switzerland is going to be something that's very, very key at many different levels. So again, if we can get a strategy that we all agree with, or mostly agree with, or mostly all of us agree with, we really have a strong tool that we can use for the future, for uniting us, for continuing, and also for local, regional and national level support. So again, just thank you very much for the participation in the groups. Thank you very much in advance for your participation in the strategy, and we will be back.